Hey, it's Brian from the Daily AI Show. Welcome to this bonus Saturday, the first bonus Saturday episode. Now, this is not a live show, and you'll notice that these aren't our voices that you're about to hear. I wanted to give you a quick background on what we decided to do and to see if really you guys like it as much as I do. What this is a podcast from Google NotebookLM on a conundrum. So, what is that? What am I talking about? Well, quick background, I've been producing our newsletter for almost a year now. And one of my favorite parts of that newsletter is creating what I call the conundrum. A few years ago, I used to work for a company called Synthesis, teaching at night, and I work with students. And when we had extra time in our classes, we would do these conundrums that you can find from Ad Astra on YouTube, still there if you want to check them out. And the students used to love them because with a conundrum, there's no great perfect answer to a question. There's always something in the middle. It could always be debated one side or the other. And I always loved that because it just made the students light up. So what I decided to do is take these conundrums, one of our recent conundrums, and I put it through a two-part process, 3 parts total. First of all, I work every week with ChatGPT to come up with the conundrum. There's a lot of back and forth on my ideas, and obviously what ChatGPT is getting me, we eventually arrive on what goes into the newsletter. Then what I've decided to do is use the power of Perplexity's deep research that just came out really a week ago and have it debate both sides of the conundrum, coming up with compelling arguments for both sides. The final part of that process is I take the results of Perplexity's debate and I feed that into Google Notebook LM, which then creates the podcast that you're about to hear. I love these. I actually think, despite the fact that the entire process is very much AI created and generated, I do find the conversations compelling and I find myself listening through the whole thing. And I just thought for our audience, you guys might actually like them as well. So I'm going to stop talking and let you get to the episode. And please let me know what you think. My idea is to put out one of these each Saturday, just as a bonus episode. And it's fun. It's always a conversation that doesn't have necessarily a right or wrong answer, but you'll learn a little something along the way. Enjoy.
All right, listeners, get ready for a deep dive that'll really stretch those brain cells. Today, we're going deep into the quantum realm, asking a question that might seem like something out of a philosophy seminar, but it really gets to the heart of how we understand the world. Ready for it? Here it is. Does using quantum computers require a leap of faith?
A leap of faith, huh? Yeah, it's a question that makes you rethink what knowledge even means, especially when these quantum computers operate in ways that kind of mess with our normal intuitions.
For sure. And to help us unpack all of this, we've got some seriously fascinating sources lined up. We'll be looking at articles on the so-called verification crisis in quantum computing, diving deep into IBM's quantum volume metric, and even exploring some pretty thought-provoking comparisons between quantum mechanics and, get this, religious faith.
Oh yeah, that's a wild mix. All right, science, philosophy, maybe even a little theology thrown in for good measure. Should be a fun ride.
Absolutely. Okay, but before we go full quantum geek here, can we do a quick recap for our listeners who might be a little fuzzy on the basics? Just a reminder of what makes quantum computing so different, so special, well, mind-blowing.
Of course, happy to. So at the core of it all, quantum computers leverage, all the weirdness and wonder of quantum mechanics to do things that our everyday computers just can't. Things like, well, you've probably heard of them, superposition and entanglement.
Yeah, those are the big ones, right? But, explain it to me as if I'm a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old who's maybe stumbled across a quantum physics textbook or two, of course.
Okay, picture this. You've got a bit in a regular computer. It's either a 0 or a 1, right? Pretty straightforward. Now, with a qubit, the quantum version, it can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. That's superposition in action. Imagine a coin spinning in the air before it lands. It's kind of both heads and tails at the same time, right? And that's what gives quantum computers that extra oomph, that ability to explore tons of possibilities all at once. It's a whole different way of processing information.
Oh, so it's not just that they're faster. It's like a totally different approach to computation, right? And entanglement. That one always makes me feel like I'm in a science fiction movie.
Entanglement. Oh, yeah. That's where things get really freaky. It's like this. You've got two of these quisits, and they get linked together. But here's the kicker. No matter how far apart they are, what you do to one of them instantly affects the other. Like, imagine those two spinning coins again. No matter how far you separate them, if one lands on heads, the other one instantly flips to tails. Spooky action at a distance, as Einstein put it.
And this isn't just theoretical, right? Like, scientists are actually building these things, these real-life quantum computers that can do these mind-bending things.
Oh, yeah, they're out there. And the potential, well, it's pretty much limitless. I mean, we're talking about simulating complex molecules to design new drugs, breaking the toughest encryption codes, even simulating black holes to get a glimpse into, well, the very fabric of the universe. Pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, it's all super exciting, but this is where we bump into that whole leap of faith thing, right? If these quantum computers are working with principles that just seem to defy our everyday logic, how do we know if we can actually trust the answers they're giving us?
Yeah, that's the heart of the issue. It's the very things that make quantum computers so powerful, superposition, entanglement, all that, that also make them incredibly difficult to check. With classical computers, it's pretty straightforward. You can trace the information, see how it flows, double-check every step of the calculation. But quantum computers, not so much. That kind of step-by-step verification, it just doesn't really work.
It's like you're given this insanely complicated math proof, right? But all the steps in between, the logic, the reasoning, it's all missing. You just get the final answer and you're supposed to just, what, take it on faith?
Pretty much. And it's even more of a head-scratcher when you think about the kinds of problems these quantum computers are tackling. I mean, we're talking about simulating stuff that's, well, at the very edge of our scientific knowledge. How do you even begin to verify the output of a black hole simulation when we're still trying to figure out the basic physics of these things? It's a real dilemma.
It's like asking, I don't know, a medieval scholar to check the calculations of a supercomputer simulating the Big Bang. They wouldn't even have the concepts, the framework to wrap their heads around it.
Exactly. And that's where the debate gets really interesting. Some folks are saying that accepting the outputs of these quantum computers, without being able to really verify them, it requires a level of trust that starts to look a lot like, well, faith.
Okay, so we've got this verification crisis brewing, but I know some of our sources also talk about IBM's quantum volume metric as a way to address this. How does that fit into all of this?
Oh yeah, quantum volume. It's IBM's attempt to, put a number on the performance of a quantum computer. They take into account things like the number of qubits, how long they stay coherent, and the complexity of the circuits they can handle.
So it's a way to measure how good a quantum computer is at doing its quantum thing, right?
Exactly. But the way they figure out this quantum volume, it relies a lot on statistics. They run an algorithm a bunch of times and look at how the answers are spread out. It's less about checking each step and more about seeing if the results consistently fall within a certain probability range.
Okay, so kind of like judging the accuracy of a weather forecast. You're not checking each individual calculation, but you're seeing if the overall predictions are generally reliable.
That's a good way to think about it. But for a lot of scientists, especially those who are coming into the traditional scientific method, relying on statistics like this, it feels like a big shift, a departure from the rigor of classical science.
Yeah, because classical science loves that reproducibility, right? Do the same experiment a bunch of times and you should get the same answer every time. But with quantum computers, it's all about probabilities, uncertainties, a little fuzziness around the edges.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole discussion so fascinating. Are we seeing a fundamental change in what it means to know something in this age of quantum computing? Are we going to have to get comfortable with a more, well, probabilistic, statistical view of knowledge?
That's a huge question, and one we're going to keep wrestling with as we go deeper into this. Speaking of wrestling with big questions, our sources also mention some interesting comparisons between the, let's say, mysterious nature of quantum mechanics and the whole concept of religious faith. Is that just a provocative analogy, or is there something more to it?
Oh, it's definitely thought-provoking, for sure.
I'm all ears. Let's break that one open.
Okay, so think about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It basically says that you can't know both the position and the momentum of a particle with perfect accuracy at the same time. And it's not that our instruments aren't good enough, it's a fundamental limit to what we can actually know about the universe.
So there's this inherent blurriness built into reality itself. It's not just about measurement. It's that certain things are just, well, fundamentally unknowable.
Exactly. And some people are drawing a parallel between this uncertainty in quantum mechanics and the idea that, well, the nature of God, of ultimate reality, is just beyond human comprehension.
So in both cases, there's this idea that we have to accept that some things are just fundamentally unknowable.
Precisely. And this is leading some to argue that, diving into quantum computing with its probabilities and systems we can't totally unpack, it requires a similar kind of, well, intellectual humility.
Interesting. So we've got this leap of faith argument and this intriguing and maybe a little controversial comparison to religious faith. But it's not all doom and gloom and blind trust, right? Some people are saying that quantum computing can be totally rigorous and scientifically valid, even if we can't always follow every single step.
Oh, absolutely. There are some super clever ways to check those quantum computations without just taking them on faith. And that's where things get really exciting. But we'll save that for the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so we spent some time talking about how quantum computing kind of throws a wrench into our usual ways of verifying things. But you mentioned that there are ways to feel confident in what these quantum computers are telling us without just blindly believing, without that leap of faith. How do we start building that trust?
Well, one of the most promising paths is something called cross-verification. Think of it like peer review, but for quantum computers. Imagine a bunch of different quantum computers, each one built a bit differently, each with its own quirks and potential for errors.
So we're not putting all our quantum eggs in one basket. We're getting second opinions, third opinions, even more from a whole bunch of different quantum machines.
Exactly. And here's where entanglement, as weird as it is, really comes in handy. We can use it to actually create networks of these quantum computers, all working on pieces of the same problem, kind of like a team.
So we're talking about a quantum internet, where these computers can communicate and actually check each other's work.
You got it. And if all these different computers, even with their different quirks, come up with the same answer, even if we can't see exactly how they got there, it really boosts our confidence. It's like having multiple witnesses all telling the same story. It's got to make you think they're onto something, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's not about trusting any single machine blindly. It's about this network of trust, this quantum cross-checking.
Yeah, it's a move towards what some call intersubjective verification. It means that, knowledge isn't just about what one person sees. It's about what a bunch of independent observers all agree on.
Our sources also mention something called trusted execution environments, or TEEs. What are those all about? How do they help us trust these quantum systems?
Oh, TEEs are like these little secure containers inside the quantum computer, kind of like black boxes that protect the really sensitive parts of the computation from being messed with or tampered with. They make sure that the algorithm, the instructions, are carried out exactly as planned, even if we can't see the nitty-gritty details of what's going on the side.
So it's adding a layer of security, ensuring the integrity of the computation, even if we still can't fully understand the quantum processes themselves.
Exactly. And the neat thing about TEEs is that they actually allow people using regular computers, classical computers, to check certain parts of the computation without needing to look at the quantum algorithm itself.
So it's like having a referee who makes sure everyone is playing by the rules without needing to understand every single strategy the players are using. They can check for fair play without knowing all the ins and outs of the game.
That's a perfect analogy. TEEs provide this balance. They keep the quantum algorithm secret, but they also give a way for outsiders to make sure things are running smoothly.
Sounds like a really important tool for building trust, especially as quantum computers start being used in, high-stakes fields like finance or national security.
Absolutely essential. And then we have quantum error correction codes. These are special algorithms, kind of like little helpers, that are designed to find and fix those little errors that pop up during a quantum computation. Qubits, they're super sensitive, easily disturbed by noise and all sorts of things. Error correction codes, they're like these little watchdogs, always keeping an eye on those qubits, making sure they stay on track.
So even though quantum computers are prone to errors, we're coming up with ways to make them more, reliable, more trustworthy.
Precisely. And here's where we can think about our regular computers, our laptops, our smartphones. We trust those every day, right? But we don't actually check every single calculation they do at the level of the transistors.
Yeah, there's no way we could keep track of every single bit flip happening inside those things. We just trust that the hardware, the software is all designed to work properly.
Exactly. Quantum computers, they build on that same trust we already have. We're relying on the principles of quantum mechanics. And that theory has been tested and verified for over a century.
So it's not blind faith. It's about taking the trust we already place in science, in engineering, and expending it to this new quantum world.
Exactly. Like Scott Aronson, he's a top quantum computing researcher. He's pointed out that, if you don't think quantum computing is possible, well, you basically have to reject quantum theory altogether. And that would go against tons of evidence we have from experiments.
Okay, so we've got these methods, these cross-checks, these trusted execution environments, these error correction codes, all working together to make us feel more confident about quantum computations. But what about that argument we were talking about before, that idea that quantum mechanics is just inherently mysterious, unknowable? How does that fit with this idea of rigorous scientific verification?
Well, yeah, it's true that quantum stuff could be really counterintuitive, mind-boggling even. But that doesn't mean it's beyond our grasp, outside of science.
So it's not magic. It's about changing how we think about how things work, right? We need to broaden our understanding of what counts as valid scientific knowledge.
Exactly. Take superposition and entanglement. As strange as they seem, they're described by very precise mathematical equations. They're not mystical. They're part of a rigorous scientific framework.
It's like saying we don't understand how a plane flies because we can't see the individual air molecules hitting the wings. There's a deeper level of explanation, right?
That's a great analogy. When a quantum computer solves a problem, it's not doing it through some magical process. It's navigating this complex energy landscape, all defined by equations, and it's a process that's just as deterministic as many classical algorithms.
So the underlying physics might be challenging to our classical intuition, but it's still grounded in math, in experiments we can reproduce.
Precisely. The key takeaway is that the mystery of quantum computing, it's not a roadblock, it's an invitation to expand how we understand things. It's a call to develop new tools, new frameworks, maybe even new ways of thinking about knowledge itself.
Okay, so we've looked at both sides of this really interesting debate. On one hand, we have the leap of faith idea, this worry that we're just being asked to trust these incredibly complex systems without fully getting how they work. But then we also see how scientists and engineers are building all these clever ways to make us more confident in quantum computing, relying on cross-verification, trusted execution environments, error correction codes. So where does that leave us? Is there a middle ground in all of this?
I think the key is recognizing that this whole debate actually reflects a deeper shift in how we define what understanding means.
Okay, now you've really got my attention. What do you mean?
Well, traditionally, classical science has been all about breaking things down into their tiniest parts, seeing how they work together in a very clear cause and effect way. But with quantum stuff, that approach hits a wall.
Because now we're dealing with probabilities, entanglement, things that just don't seem to follow our normal ideas of cause and effect.
Exactly. Think about a qubit in superposition. We might never actually see it in both states at the same time. But we can do experiments, gather data, and build a solid understanding of how it behaves, all based on probabilities, on relationships.
So the focus shifts from needing to see the inner workings of the machine to being able to predict and verify what it produces, what comes out of it.
Exactly. And the same applies to cross-checking those different quantum computers. Even if we can't dissect every single calculation in each one, the fact that they all agree on the answer, that's a very powerful form of verification.
It's like saying, we might not get how each individual brain works, but if a bunch of different people come to the same conclusion independently, it strengthens our belief in that conclusion.
You nailed it. It's about recognizing that understanding can come in different flavors. In the quantum world, it might mean embracing a more statistical, relational kind of understanding rather than always needing to pinpoint the exact cause and effect.
So it's not about ditching scientific rigor. It's about expanding what we consider to be valid scientific knowledge.
Exactly. Think about how scientists back in the 19th century came to accept the laws of thermodynamics. They didn't need to track every single molecule. They figured out statistical methods, these big picture laws, that allowed them to understand and predict how heat and energy behave, even though they couldn't see all the tiny details.
It sounds like we're seeing a similar kind of shift with quantum computing. We're developing new tools, new ways of thinking to verify these systems, even if we can't always peer into the quantum void and see every interaction.
Precisely. And the important thing, as with any powerful technology, is finding the right balance. We can use all those protocols we talked about, the cross-checking, the TEEs, the error correction, to make sure things are rigorous and accountable. But we also have to watch out for what some call black box epistemology.
Black box epistemology. Okay, that sounds a little ominous. What's that about?
It's this idea that we just start accepting answers from these complex systems without really asking for enough evidence or justification. We get so reliant on what the black box spits out that we stop questioning how it got there. We risk becoming, well, just passive consumers of information rather than actively seeking to understand.
So it's like trusting our GPS to get us to our destination without ever understanding how it actually works. If it suddenly tells us to drive off a cliff, we need to be able to stop and say, hold on, something's not right here.
Exactly. We can't fall into this trap of just blindly following technology. Just because a quantum computer gives us an answer, it doesn't automatically make it true. We've got to keep that healthy skepticism, that willingness to question, to dig deeper, to demand evidence.
So it's about holding on to that critical thinking, that scientific way of looking at things, even as we explore this amazing world of quantum possibilities.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole discussion so fascinating and so important. Quantum computing isn't just a technology thing, it's a philosophy thing. It makes us rethink the very foundations of how we know what we know.
We've covered so much ground here. It's incredible. The leap of faith argument, the challenges of verification, even those philosophical ideas about black box epistemology. It's clear that quantum computing isn't just about faster computers. It's about asking some really big questions about knowledge, trust, and how we understand the world.
It really is. And I think the coolest part is that we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore, to understand, to discover.
Well, I think it's time to shift gears a bit, bring all of this back down to earth and see what it means for us, the everyday folks who use technology, not just the physicists. When we come back, we'll try to make sense of it all and see what insights we can take away from this quantum adventure. Okay, so we've gone deep, really deep into the quantum world, explored that whole leap of faith argument, grappled with some ideas that honestly kind of make your head spin. But as we come back to reality, what's the big takeaway here? What do you really want our listeners to think about?
Well, if we take a step back, I think the most important thing to remember is this. Quantum computing, it's not about throwing reason out the window or just blindly believing whatever the machine tells us. It's about expanding how we think about knowledge itself, how we make sure it's valid in a world where information comes from, well, increasingly complex systems that can seem kind of opaque, kind of mysterious.
So it's less about ditching our old ways of knowing and more about adding new tools, new perspectives to the mix, right?
Exactly. Think about the telescope. When it was invented, it totally revolutionized astronomy. But it didn't mean everything people had observed with the naked eye was suddenly wrong. It just meant we could see farther, gather more data, and, in the end, refine our understanding of the universe.
I like that. It's like quantum computing gives us this powerful new lens to view reality, one that lets us see things, explore things that were totally hidden before.
And just like with any powerful tool, we have to use it carefully, thoughtfully. We have to understand its limitations, keep refining how we verify things, and always, always be willing to question what we think we know.
So it's not blind trust. It's about being smarter, more sophisticated, about how we interpret the results, about recognizing that what counts as knowledge in this quantum age, well, it might look different than what we're used to.
That's it. And I think this has implications, big implications, that go way beyond just quantum computing.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. What are some of those bigger implications? How might this change in how we approach knowledge and verification affect other areas?
Well, let's think about AI, artificial intelligence. These systems are getting more and more complex, but how they make decisions is often becoming less clear. We're already having trouble figuring out how they arrive at their conclusions, and this is only going to get tougher as AI gets more powerful, more widespread.
So what we're learning about trust and verification in the quantum world, it could actually be super important for navigating the future of AIs.
Definitely. We need to start thinking now about how we can trust these AI systems, how we make sure what they produce is reliable, that it aligns with our values, and how we avoid those dangers of black box decision-making. This whole quantum computing debate is really forcing us to confront these questions.
It's like a sneak peek into the challenges we're going to face as we move into a world of, well, more complex, more autonomous systems. We need to develop a new kind of literacy, a new way of understanding and interacting with information, whether it comes from qubits or algorithms.
Exactly. And it goes even deeper than that. This shift in how we think about knowledge could totally change how we form our beliefs, how we judge evidence, even how we make decisions in a world where we rely more and more on systems we might not totally understand.
So this quantum leak, it's not just a technology thing. It's about how we think, how we learn, how we make sense of everything around us. It's about recognizing that the whole idea of knowing, well, it might be changing right before our eyes.
You said it perfectly. It's like an invitation to be more aware, more critical, more careful about the information that shapes our understanding of the world.
All right, as we wrap things up, what's one question you want to leave our listeners with? Something for them to ponder as they continue exploring all of this.
Well, if quantum computing is making us rethink how we understand and verify information, what other areas of knowledge might be affected by this? Could this have implications for things like economic, politics, history, even our personal relationships?
Wow, those are some really big questions to think about. It feels like this is just the beginning of a really exciting and maybe even a little mind-blowing journey.
It definitely is. And I encourage everyone to keep that curiosity alive, stay engaged, keep asking those big fundamental questions. Because the answers, well, they might lead us to a whole new understanding of ourselves and the universe we live in.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive into the world of quantum computing to a close. I hope you've enjoyed exploring that leap of faith argument, the challenges of making sure things are accurate, and all the broader implications for how we understand and interact with knowledge in a world that just keeps getting more complex. Remember, this is just the starting point. There's a whole universe of knowledge out there just waiting to be discovered. So keep those questions coming, keep learning, and keep that quantum spark alive.